So you guys already know about my Doctor Who obsession from my previous videos. Um, and usually I don't actively post about the new stuff because, I normally just do specific series. But I felt that I too need to talk about the current state of Russell T Davis's second run of the series and Doctor Who as a whole based on a couple of days ago at the time of recording this, or the episode that was released known as The Reality War. And there's tons of other videos about other stuff on this episode, but here I'm going to be analyzing something which I feel is weirdly an underrated aspect, even if it should be something that's in everyone's minds, which is the main villain. So I know that majority of people talk about Billy Piper 16th, which I have mixed opinions on, but I need to talk about this right here. So this video is only going to be about Omega specifically. I'm not going to be talking about the rest of the episode because, again, as you know, I'm a lot into the Doctor Who EU, and I have consumed a lot of media about Omega. When I watched the episode Wishworld, and I saw that Omega was returning, and I saw all the hints that there was, like the robot revolution when they had the same colors as the fight scene from the Three Doctors, I thought, okay, maybe it's time that I'm gonna be able to talk about Omega and maybe even do a short video or history video, or maybe I'll enjoy it. But then I saw what happened, and I think that definitely there could be some improvements to be made. So I think I'm gonna start on the beginning and the context of what exactly this thing that you're looking at is. This is supposed to be Omega, who the episode itself names as the first Time Lord and the creator of the Time Lords. Which, I mean, technically that's wrong because it is Rassilon in the old canon, or if you use Chibnall's new canon, it is Tecteun, or who can also call the other, but I won't get into that. I'm gonna roll with what the show says. So what else is there about Omega other than he is one of the founders of Time Lord Society? Maybe that he fully created time travel. In fact, he's the one who made them into Time Lords, as before they were Space Lords, since they had a mastery over space specifically. Omega was born as Palix and was part of the same Great House, which are basically living houses that the Time Lords live in. So, for example, the Doctor's house is called the House of Longbarrow, and he had many cousins in there. So, similarly, Rassilon was part of the Great House that Omega was in, and they are essentially just cousins. Palix got the name Omega from achieving the lowest mark possible in an essay he wrote about increasing Gallifrey's power by exploding a star and harnessing that energy for time travel. Him and Rassilon later became solar engineers, and there's quite a bit of lore, but the parts that are relevant is that essentially they did a revolution against the matriarchal government called the Pythia, who ran away and became the Sisterhood of Khan, but then placed a curse upon the Time Lords to make them sterile. In fact, the reality war backs this up when the Doctor says that time was sterile. And they bring up the looms that they use, which I actually found really interesting, and I thought the episode was going to be good from that. Omega, in fact, when Rassilon and him had power, created time travel, but he was betrayed by Rassilon, sent to an antimatter universe, where subjecting that antimatter made him completely lose his body over time, which is where the second and the third Doctors meet up with him and find out in the Three Doctors. So that's a run on his backstory paraphrased, but if you want a detailed explanation, I recommend the Confused Adiposes video. I'll probably link it below. But I just gave a brief summary just in case you just came out of the episode and were like, who the hell was this? Why does he look like that? So that's a run on his backstory. But anyway, let's just see here. So, Russell T Davies, you've got this villain. You know that he has insane beef with the Time Lords. He's got an amazing armor design, but no body. Now the Rani is trying to bring him back to create a new Gallifrey. You know he wants to be known as a god and wants the credit that Rassilon never gave him. So how would you bring him back? You definitely do not make him a giant zombie who comes in and eats the other main villain, the Rani, before being blasted away by a laser, which just is a MacGuffin for the midway point of an episode for the focus shifts to something that no one cares about. Like, come on, hello? This guy really should have been like a Thanos type character of Doctor Who. Should have been like a series long threat with some insane emotional beats and moments. If you wanted to do what you just did, instead of making it Omega, why didn't you just make the God of Madness an original character, like you did for the Wish Baby? Why did you have to use Omega? Even Sutek last season had more respect than that, being the main villain who killed everybody in the universe and at least was on screen for longer than a minute. And that's the same guy who was changed from a galactic conqueror sealed away by his own people into a dog defeated by rope. By the way, a slight tangent, but if you want actually good Sutek content, I recommend checking out the Faction Paradox audios. They even got Gabriel Wolf to voice him too. So anyway, for Omega, let's start on what they should have actually done. Option 1 is that they insist on a big CGI monster. First of all, I'm not against the idea of making Omega an eldritch being in this way because, as said, he wants to be a god. I kind of like the idea that Omega got his wish, but not in the way that he wanted, because this isn't the way to do that. Imagine a scene of him looking down at his body and realizing the grotesque abomination he's become before thinking how he is a Time Lord now. How is he still a Time Lord? Especially since he feels an unnatural and insatiable hunger towards them, which he says. Now bear in mind, the last we saw of Omega was all the way during the Fifth Doctor's tenure. Does he know anything about the Time War, the Timeless Child, or the Master Genocide? I would have thought that a scene could be cool of the Doctor saying that there's no Time Lords left except them three. And Omega having some sort of realization that he's one of the last, but also pleasure in the thought that Rassilon and the people who betrayed him are likely dead. And that he's free to rule, but he could die since he cannot become a true god of time, as he is of course the Mad God, without any Time Lords to fulfill the hunger that he's got. Another idea, which to be honest, my headcanon, as I outright refuse to believe this thing is Omega, is that the CGI monster isn't actually Omega, it's simply an aspect of his mind. That is something he has shown before, wanting Pertwee to fight the dark side of his mind. Maybe with his mind being more, confused from being in this underverse, it has grown into monstrous proportions. The episode slightly backs this up by saying it's an idea of Omega and not really him, more like an echo of a memory of like his myth than the actual character. I guess I did kind of like that aspect that the real Omega is still down there. What we saw is basically a physical manifestation of the legend that Conrad brought upon him because of the Wish World, and he had the books that the Rani gave him. Anyway, let's move on to option 2 and what I would prefer. The way that costs less money and could have been way better. In fact, Rusty Davis is the person who brought back Rassilon as well, right? Back in his first era. How did he do it? He brought back an actually good actor. He did not make Rassilon a 30-foot tall mouse mutant. No, he brought back a good actor to play him, and he did the role well. Regardless of what you think of the End of Time, you cannot deny that Timothy Dalton was really good as Rassilon. In a perfect world, I would have loved Peter Davison to play Omega, considering the lost body that Omega stole was indeed the Doctor's body, and Peter played that role at the time very well. I would love a combination of the costumes and maybe an addition to the original one from the Three Doctors. So the vault opens to reveal Omega, who is still insistent in being the god of time after his time in the Underverse, almost in a Dr. Manhattan type way, as being there for so long has made him truly omniscient and seemingly omnipotent in his abilities. Then you can still have the god element while keeping it good. And then we can do the same kind of time logic like what happened in Lux with the metafiction, but imagine the Doctor and Ronnie were sent to different time periods or things reverse, slow down, like the glass cracking effect. It was in the episode, but for Omega, not for the other plot.
Sack Russell T Davis, sack Jane Tranter, sack Phil Collinson, sack Julie Gardner.
Now, I heavily doubt you could satisfyingly defeat this in like 30 minutes, so I definitely think that should be series long with the Doctor losing his TARDIS for Series 3, as Omega creates Gallifrey in his own twisted image. Or maybe they realize they can't recreate Gallifrey since Omega literally has no body. Maybe the Doctor has to infiltrate and then get to a position to shoot him with a billion supernovas again, just like how Rassilon betrayed him, and he did kill him here. I do think it's a bit poetic he's defeated in the same way, but kind of like in the Robot Revolution, how the Doctor was actively gaining power in that robot society. What if he did the same on New Gallifrey but hid himself? I think that they should let him be on screen for longer than 5 minutes before they beat him. I would love a Flux kind of thing, seeing Omega in the role of creating New Gallifrey with the Ranis, and then the Doctor and friends defending and infiltrating that. Option 3 is that wasn't even Omega. You could keep this the exact same as it was and have it work if there just was an Omega. Maybe the Rani screwed up. There's another theory that the Rani brought through the Nightmare Child through instead, which basically the Doctor describes as a Dalek creation which went rogue on them, and basically ate Davros' ship. Again, that thing never said once it was Omega. Omega chants his name like, oh, the will of Omega and I'm Omega all the time. What if she just brought in some random horrendous beast she couldn't even think of? I just like the thought that a mad scientist Time Lord went into basically hell to bring out Omega, but ended up bringing out something completely different, like some Frankenstein type creature. And that's a really interesting thought. Also, I headcanon it to be the Nightmare Child. This means that Enshuti technically had a Dalek story. Again, this is me just spitballing, but do you understand how much RTD flopped with making a character with so much potential by simply making him a random big zombie who had the worst character arc ever? It's just, I want to eat Time Lords, and then he eats the Ronnie. Doctor's like, oh, what are your goals? And then he's just like, I want to eat Time Lords. Like, what? Anyway, that's all for me. I want to focus on how they completely fumbled the bag of having the big bad of this episode and, you know, just be useless, and how this episode just didn't work in terms of that. I did enjoy some elements. I like the unit versus the bone beasts, even if I think Unit Tower should have become a giant mech of the Brigadier, something like Gurren Lagann. I even liked Anita did coming back. I just want Russell to stop destroying our favorite villains. I wouldn't be surprised if the boss is some big CGI monster who gets destroyed with a gun again in 5 minutes. So the main thing that made me make this video was a Twitter post I made, which got a decent amount of attention, so I want to read some of my favorite suggestions by other people here for ideas. If you're gonna have him be the god of time, why not have some fun with it? Pause time, reverse, speed it up. Yeah, so this inspired my idea of him being a Dr. Manhattan type, who is basically god insane, but has all these godlike powers. I really thought Omega was gonna walk through that gate, and when the Rani realized that he has no body under his robes and helmet and her plan wouldn't work, she was gonna break down and go scorched earth. Again, that's an amazing idea. There is something interesting about the notion that Omega's loss of power has totally corrupted him into a force beyond even his own control. It's the Almighty. Again, Gygas is a great example. Even if they want to continue using these weird Undertale references, they have Asriel as an example of Flowey. They really should have let the creature's identity ambiguous. Joanna's dialogue had the Rani and the Doctor speculate as to its identity, but no clear answers. Is it a corrupted Omega, a different variety of the Bone Beast, some sort of Guardian? Exactly, they should have done that. That's why I have my Nightmare Child theory. But anyway, that's my opinion. What are your thoughts on Omega and the episode in general, but specifically about the villain? How would you have improved Omega? I would like to hear your ideas in the comments. So yeah, thanks for watching.